Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight we step off the map and onto a single narrow line that cuts through the spine of the East, the Appalachian Trail. 2,000 miles of ridges and hollows where a tent is a thin idea, and the woods keep their own time. In this episode, we bring you 7 deeply disturbing accounts from first-hand witnesses, hikers, campers, nightwalkers, people who went looking for quiet and found something waiting. Voices that call your name exactly the way you say it. Figures that shouldn't exist pacing forgotten switchbacks. Old mining scars where the ground still breathes like it remembers. Every story you're about to hear has been carefully reconstructed from testimony, faithfully preserving their words, their breath, the exact moment the world tilted. Names and a few small details have been changed for privacy. The core remains untouched. The fear is real. These mountains have hidden their secrets for centuries. Tonight, we lift the veil just enough to look in. If you're new here, subscribe to Shadow Whisper for true horror, night after night. And ring the bell, so you never miss it when the darkness calls. I saw her first in a photograph, not with my eyes. That's the detail people always ask me to repeat like it proves something either way. I didn't see a ghost. I saw a picture that made the hair on my arms lift and made me check the corners of my tent, even though I knew there was nothing there but my boots and the cold. We were 3 on that trip, me, Tyler, and his cousin Lena. Late October when the leaves had already changed and were now letting go in slow red sheets. We chose a spur off the main ridge because Tyler wanted good sunrise shots, and I wanted a weekend where my phone only worked as a camera. We hiked in under a pale sky that looked like unpainted wood. The wind moved, but not in a hurry. That's how the Appalachians speak to me. Slow, careful, older than my plans. The clearing sat just off the trail, a quiet bowl in the trees with 2 tall white pines at the far edge. They were straight and polite, needles whispering above the height I could imagine. Between them, the world framed itself. It felt like a doorway that had forgotten its house. We joked about it, of course. Tyler, with his big lens and bigger opinions, said this was nature's tripod. Lena snapped a few pictures on her phone, then knelt to touch the moss like it was a sleeping pet. I stood back and let the place add itself to my memory in a slow, respectful way. Sometimes I don't trust cameras to tell the truth. Sometimes I don't trust my memory either. I took a few shots anyway, because that's what you do now to prove to your future self that you were real. We set camp 30 yards away, just out of sight of the pines, because the breeze there was softer and the ground held our stakes like a promise. We boiled water. We told those lazy trail stories you tell not to impress but to warm the silence. When the light went, it went honest and fast. I sat in the tent mouth with my socks steaming on a rock and scrolled through the day's photos. Trees, sky, leaves like spilled coins. Then the clearing appeared on my screen, and in the space between the 2 pines stood a girl. She wasn't facing the camera. She was turned slightly, as if she had been about to leave and then changed her mind. Her dress looked pale, could have been white, could have been gray, could have been yellow once, but the evening had washed it out. Bare legs, bare feet, hair like wet rope over one shoulder. If you're picturing a horror movie, stop. There was nothing exaggerated about her. She looked the way a real person looks when you catch them in the background by accident. Present, unaware, busy with her own life. Still, she did not belong in my day. "Hey," I said to the tent and the steam and the patient night. "Tyler, look at this." He leaned over, smelled like smoke and coffee, and frowned the way he frowns at focus issues. "Weird," he said, already wanting a technical answer. "Could be light through the pines, could be lens flare pulled long." He zoomed in with his finger. The pixels held a face now. Not all of it, but enough to guess at cheek and eyelashes and a mouth that had not chosen a mood yet. "Huh," he said softer. "Did you see anyone out there?" "No," I said, and I felt the word come out too quick. And we were right there. We would have seen her. Lena reached past me and pinched the screen like she was touching the girl's hand. "She's pretty," she said. Which is a human thing to say when your brain wants to make something normal. "Maybe another campsite?" Maybe she was just standing between those trees, I said. And I didn't know why the exact spot mattered, but it did. Right between, we checked the rest. In a photo I'd taken 5 minutes later from almost the same angle, the space between the pines was empty. The sky behind them had shifted toward that deep, breath-held blue. No girl. Tyler went back to his big camera and scrolled through RAWs with his careful photographer hands. He found 3 frames of the clearing. In the first, empty. In the second, a shadow that suggested a human shape if you were willing to believe. In the third, there she was, smaller than in mine, still turned away, still between the trees. The fire cracked. A coyote called far off with that lonely voice that always sounds like someone laughing where they shouldn't. We let it be. We talked about exposure and shutter speed and how sometimes weird light makes weird things. We talked about people too. How a teenager might dare herself to stand in the cold for attention she didn't need. How hikers sometimes do strange, quiet things separate from the tribe. Then we zipped the night behind nylon and let the mountain press its slower kind of sleep on our eyes. I woke at 3 in the morning because a dream let go of me too fast. The tent was a pale skin against a darker skin. The cold had found the little air left in the bag. I needed to pee, which is a silly reason to feel fear, but I did. I slid the zipper down as soft as I could, the fabric talking to itself, and stepped into the night. The moon was low and lazy. The clearing was a square of darker dark. The 2 pines stood like shoulders. Between them, someone was standing exactly where the girl had stood. I blinked once and twice and let my eyes be sure. The person did not move. I told myself it was a stump, and stumps are good citizens. I told myself I could go 10 steps and check and then come back to warmth. I told myself a lot of things, not to make me brave, but to make me average. I took 1 step, and something soft touched my ankle. I nearly fell. I looked down. It was just a pine root raised by years like an old scar. The shape between the pines did not change. I wanted to be someone who could walk closer and solve the simple equation of distance. Instead, I did the smart, small thing. I took care of my human need and went back to my heat. In the morning, I would walk up to those trees with coffee breath and sun at my back and see nothing but bark. I lay in the bag awake until the first gray smudged the tent. I dozed just enough to call it sleep. When we stepped out into a cold that wanted a name, we went straight to the clearing because pretending not to is worse. The space between the pines was a clean slice of air. My breath looked exactly like hers might have if she had been real and it had been this cold. Tyler walked into the space and turned facing us, grinning because jokers joke. I raised my phone and took a picture because that's what you do now to prove who stood where. When I checked the screen, the image showed him, yes, but not where he was. In the photo, Tyler stood closer than he had stood in life. The 2 pines on the screen were narrower, like the distance between them had closed a little around his shoulders. And my friend, to the camera, was maybe 3 feet from me. In real life, he was 10. He stepped out of the frame and the space reopened, like breath after a cough. I didn't say anything clever. I lowered the phone and let the mountain settle on the moment the way snow settles on a porch railing nobody owns anymore. That was the first time I felt what this story is really about. It isn't about a ghost. It isn't about a girl that climbs out of pictures. It's about distance and how sometimes the mountains fold it like a blanket, neat and quiet, and tuck it around something you didn't know you were keeping. We left the clearing slower than we arrived. That's not poetry. It's an honest detail. The trail felt like it had grown a new curve overnight, a small polite bend to keep the pines in view longer. We pretended we were hungry and wanted oatmeal right now. We pretended we didn't want to turn around every 10 steps and shoot the same frame again, chasing a change we felt more than saw. I boiled water. Tyler measured coffee like a ritual. Lena stood with her back to camp and watched the 2 pines without moving, like a person guarding a door they don't intend to use. I told them what I had seen in the night and tried hard to tell it plain. When I finished, Tyler nodded like a man who knows that even if he doesn't believe you, he believes you believe yourself. Let's try something, he said. He took 3 photos from 3 spots, counting with his feet because people can't help themselves. He stepped exactly 5 paces from the first spot to the second, then 5 again, all heel to toe careful. In each picture, the pines stood the same, patient and tall. In each picture, the space between them narrowed subtly but there, like breath let out in stages. I hate it, Lena said, and her voice had that thin top edge fear gives. It's like someone breathing where no one is. We did the stupid thing then and made it more personal. We put ourselves in the frame. First Lena stood between the pines, then Tyler, then me. We took turns. We reviewed the shots with the cold on our fingers, making us clumsy and honest. In each, the person in the space stood closer in the photo than they had stood to the camera. Not wildly closer. Not movie close. Just less far. Lena's braid looked like it could brush my sleeve if I reached. Tyler's grin looked like a half-whispered joke. In my photo, the one I asked Lena to take of me, I looked tired and happy in that hiking way, and I looked like I had taken 2 steps too many without knowing why. Okay, I said, and I heard the extra breath I put into it to keep my voice level. We pack and head down. We can laugh at this in a diner with eggs. That was the plan, Tyler said, but he didn't move. Yeah, Lena said, eyes still on the trees. Let's do the plan. We tore down camp quickly, but the mountain made it feel slow. I kept my phone in my pocket and refused to check the pictures, as if the photographs could change in the dark and become a worse truth. We shouldered our packs and took the trail south, which curved away from the clearing and then curved back like a person trying to leave a conversation they shouldn't be in. Half a mile later, we met a ranger on patrol, which usually feels like morning luck. He was older than I expected, smaller too, the kind of man who knows how to fill space without taking it. He asked for our permit with a voice that had said these words through all weather. As he checked it, Lena, who couldn't sit on a question longer than a minute if you paid her, said, "Can I ask you something not on the paper?" He smiled with one corner of his mouth, the corner that knows this line. She told him about the girl in the picture, and about how distance feels different between the 2 pines, and about how the space squeezes people just a little. He didn't laugh. He didn't frown. He looked over our shoulders toward a point we could not see from where we stood. His eyes knew the map so well he could look around corners. "Those 2 white pines?" he asked. "Clear bowl off the spur?" "That's the one," Tyler said. "People take pictures there," the ranger said, which was almost an answer. He leaned in slightly to hand me back the permit, and his voice went softer in a way that didn't ask us to be afraid, just to be serious. "If you go back," he said, "don't take the same picture twice. Don't repeat distance on purpose, and maybe don't stand between them. That stand's older than it looks." "Older how?" I asked, because I can't help trying to make a number out of a feeling. "Before I was born," he said, then flicked his eyes at me with a dry humor I liked. "And I'm older than I look." He nodded past us toward the trail. "You'll make the road by noon if you keep a good pace. Weather's swinging later. Don't let it catch you up there." We walked. The trail went soft under us in places where snow likes to start arguments. Every time the trees thinned and the sky opened, I felt the small tug of a thought that wasn't mine, a quiet suggestion to turn, to check, to measure again. I kept my eyes ahead. I put one boot in front of the other. I told my legs the oldest truth. We leave by leaving. At a little spring where water ticked out of rock and made a metal taste in the air, we stopped to drink. Lena sat on a flat stone and scrolled through her gallery with the speed of someone ripping a bandage. She stopped, laughed once without humor, and turned the phone so we could see. It was a photo of the clearing we had not taken, an angle from higher up, like the eye of a hawk or a drone. Between the 2 pines, the girl stood small and exact. In the foreground, 3 figures were entering the frame. I recognized us by our shapes. "I don't have service," Lena said, which was not a question. I didn't download anything, it just appeared in my camera roll. Tyler took the phone and checked the metadata because he is who he is. No date, no location. Just a file sitting where it shouldn't. He handed it back with the most honest answer either of us had. I don't know. We walked faster. The trail decided to play nice for a while, then threw a few quick rocks at our ankles just to make sure we were paying attention. At a switchback, I made the mistake of turning to look, to really look, and the 2 white pines sat in my eye like a word I hadn't finished learning. I lifted my phone without meaning to, the reflex of a decade. The screen filled with the clearing which shouldn't have been visible from that angle. The girl stood between the pines, closer now, and her head had turned just enough for me to see half of her face. She could have been any age between 12 and 25. Her eyes were open and, soft is the word I want, but that isn't right. Not sad, not happy. A look like wind wears when it passes a window, aware of the glass, not stopped by it. Don't, Tyler said, gentle but firm, and took the phone with 2 fingers like it was hot. He slid it into the top of my pack, zipped the pocket, and patted it the way you pat a distracted dog. No more pictures today. Fair, I said, and tried to become the kind of person who can walk away from stories before they finish the sentence. We made the road by noon, like the ranger said. The wind changed then, sharp at the edges, pushing our jackets into our backs with a flat hand. We ate in the car, windows shut against the new weather. Bread and cheese and that weird satisfaction tired bodies get from simple salt. We said we'd send each other our favorite shots later. We said we'd remember this weekend as a good one, because most of it was, because not everything needs a headline. On the drive out, just past the last wooden sign with the carved bear, Lena's phone chimed even though none of ours had bars. She looked and went very still. The photo on her screen showed our car driving away. Taken from the clearing, taken from between the 2 pines. In the rear window, the reflection of my face looked back, closer than it should have been. The girl stood behind me like a second reflection had bled through. I felt the cold in my hands even with the heater on. Tyler reached without asking and held my wrist for 2 breaths, not to calm me but to remind me where I was. It's distance, I said, quiet. To the road. It's folding. Then stop measuring, he said, in that way he has when he is absolutely right. We didn't speak much after that. The radio tried to find stations and failed in the polite way it does out there. The sky thickened with a weather we didn't want. We reached town in the usual way people do. Gas station, coffee that tastes like the pot, a clerk who looks like they've heard everything and still wish people had better stories. I went home to my small apartment with its small views and turned my phone off on purpose like a person who has learned a rule. I slept with the lamp on because I forgive myself small lights now. In the morning, I found a photograph sitting in my camera roll that I had not taken. It was my living room window. 2 street trees framed the glass. Between them, the girl stood closer than before. I didn't run. That's another detail people want me to say, like it makes me brave. I didn't run because there was nowhere to run to that wasn't either outside or inside, and the picture was both. I made coffee slowly, holding the mug with 2 hands the way children do when the cup is heavier than their idea of themselves. I sat at the table and stared at the photo and tried to make simple sense first. Maybe Lena had airdropped something to me without knowing. Maybe the phone had glitched. Maybe I had sleepwalked through a moment and hit the shutter. All the maybes sat in a small row and knocked on each other like dominoes that refused to fall. The girl in this new picture faced the glass. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the window, at the reflection of a room that had a couch and a plant and a lamp that gave the kind of light apartments forgive themselves. Her dress hung straight. Her arms were loose. The distance between the 2 street trees was wrong. Too tight. I set the phone face down because that action still means no in my body. The room returned to being a room. The lamp hummed a little, which I decided meant it was alive. I called Tyler first because he had earned that. He answered on the 3rd ring and said my name in the warm way friends do when they're already on your side. I told him. He listened, He didn't tell me it was nothing. He didn't tell me to throw the phone away. He said 2 pines, 2 street trees. Distance is sneaky. It likes rhymes. Then he said I'd come over like a porch light. I went. Because sometimes the first decision is the only one you need. His place smelled like darkroom chemicals even though he hasn't had a darkroom since college. He laid out our prints on the table like a map. Clearing, girl, pines. Us too close. He added the picture from my roll with the street trees, and even on his screen, which is kinder than mine, the distance was wrong. He pulled a measuring tape from a drawer and laughed at himself as he did. But he measured the space between the street trees in real life through the window, and then measured the same span on the photo at scale. In the picture, the gap was 3 inches narrower than it should have been. He looked at me and I saw fear put on his face like a hat he hates. It's not a lens thing, he said. It's the place. What do I do? I asked, because asking is honest. Stop taking pictures, he said. Delete the ones she's in. Don't give distance a grip. He scratched his jaw. And don't stand between anything that wants to be a frame. I went home with that rule like a stone in my pocket. I deleted what I could around the girl and kept what I couldn't let go of that wasn't poisoned by her shape. I taped a note near my window. No frames. I moved the plant so the 2 street trees wouldn't align if I sat on the couch. I changed small things because small things are human-sized tools. For a few days that was enough. The pictures stopped arriving. My camera roll became a list of meals and clouds and nothing doors. On the 4th night, at the hour when the city quiets in a way that is almost kindness, I woke to a soft tap on the glass. Not much, just one like a fingernail politely testing the world. I lay with my eyes closed and breathed, counting names, not numbers, because I had learned a hard lesson. Maple, ash, sycamore, oak. I opened my eyes and saw the window as a darker rectangle in the dark. I stood, walked to the kitchen for water the way you act normal to force reality to respect you, and on the way back I looked because people look. The 2 street trees held the window in an old grip. Between them the air was only air. I told myself I had won a small round. In the morning there was a new picture in my phone. It showed the cemetery on the edge of town where I sometimes walk because the path is quiet, and the stones ask very little of you. In the photo, 2 cedar trees framed a small hill. Between them, the girl stood with her head lowered like she was reading a name. The sun in the picture was wrong for the hour I saw it. It was sharp and high, a noon sun while my kitchen stood in morning soft. I hadn't been to the cemetery in weeks. Distance had decided to mail me postcards. I wrote the ranger's station number on a piece of paper because calling made sense. I told myself I would go sit in their tired lobby and say the words without trying to make them pretty. Then I pictured the ranger with his eyes that knew corners of maps and heard him say, "Don't take the same picture twice. Don't repeat distance." I realized I was about to do exactly that with my fear. Walk the same path, ask the same questions, step into the same space between 2 pines made of sentences. I put the paper down. I did the next small thing. I went to work. I answered emails. I wrote thank you 3 times to 3 different people, because politeness is a frame you can stand inside without it crushing you. That evening, I walked to the cemetery on purpose. I didn't go to chase a ghost. I went to choose where I stand. The cedars were there, quiet and smelling like pencil shavings. The hill was there, low and accepting. The sun lay low and gold, not sharp noon. I stood well to the side, never letting the 2 trees line up around me. I waited until the light left the stones and the first chill hinted at what night would want. Then I spoke because it felt wrong not to. I didn't ask her name. I didn't ask why. I said one thing in a voice that was my daytime voice. "I see what you do," I said. "I won't help you do it." The wind moved the cedar tips. The distance stayed distance. I went home by the long way, counting store awnings and dogs and lights, not numbers. When I unlocked my door, there was an envelope on the floor with no stamp and no address. Inside was a single printed photograph. Glossy, cheap drugstore kind. It was the clearing. 2 pines. Between them, me. Not then. Now, the clothes I wore that day. My watch showing the hour. My mouth set the way it sets when I am being stubborn enough to survive. On the back, in small pencil, a sentence walked like someone had learned the alphabet without a teacher. Don't come close. The period was a little dark. Like the pencil had paused there as if it wanted to make the dot bigger and then thought better of it. I put the photo in a drawer and closed it. I turned my phone camera off in settings and then put tape over the lens like a spy who has learned he is not special. I lived like that for a while, patient and careful, not waiting for anything except ordinary days. Sometimes a knock came on the window, polite and rare. Sometimes the radio in a stranger's car showed a station name that spelled out 2 words that made my stomach drop. 2 pines. When that happened, I looked at my shoes and admired their laces and let the song finish without letting it count me. Months later, I went back once. I won't make that mistake glamorous. It was a flat day, leafless and gray, the kind of day that respects no photograph. I stood far off the trail and looked across an elbow of land to where the 2 white pines drew their slow line between sky and ground. They were just trees. They were not just trees. I took no pictures. I said nothing. I felt the old tug, the gentle hand of a thing that folds distance the way a careful person folds a sweater. I took 1 step backward, then another, and then the leaves of another part of the forest took me up and the pines were a memory again. At home later, there was a photo in my camera roll I had not taken. It was my front door. The 2 hallway sconces flanked it like a joke the building was making. Between them, the girl stood closer than ever, so close I could have reached, and, this is important, so close I did not reach. I deleted the photo. I turned the phone face down. I sat in the dark without a frame and waited for my heartbeat to choose its own speed. It did. It always does if you give it time. If you're hearing this because you like scary stories, that's fine. I like them too. But listen to me here at the end where the air is thinner, and the voice is the only light we share. The mountains are older than our measurements. Some places let you step inside a picture and not notice the door has locked until your breath fogs the glass. If you find 2 trees that frame the world too neatly, admire them from the side. If a camera teaches you a new way to be close, don't learn it. If a girl stands between 2 pines and seems to move nearer each time you look once, then go. Be rude to the frame. Be kind to your distance. Keep the door open behind you the whole time you are alive. I found the cabin because the weather changed its mind about me. I went into the mountains with a clear sky and a map that looked honest. By mid-afternoon, the light went flat, the air turned metallic, and a cold rain began to fall in straight threads, as if the clouds had found a zipper and pulled it. I told myself I could handle an early storm. I had layers. I had a stove. I had sense. But when the wind came down the ridge and punched through my jacket like it knew my name, I stopped pretending and started looking for shelter. The trail narrowed into dark laurel and the drops turned to sleet that ticked on the leaves like small nails. My breath became a little engine in front of my face. I tried to keep south in my head, tried to remember where the topo lines opened, where a campsite might be, but the mountain kept changing the question. Then, between 2 stands of spruce, I saw smoke. It was a thin column, clean and gray, rising from the trees in a steady breath. Not a brush fire. Not a campfire lost under rain. It was the kind of smoke that comes from a chimney when dry wood burns slow in a good stove. The smell carried to me in short, perfect pieces. Old sap, hot iron, something like bread. I cut off the trail and followed my nose, ducking branches until a small clearing stepped out of the brush, and in the middle of it sat the cabin. It wasn't a pretty place. Dark boards, roof pitched low, no ornaments, no porch. The windows were real glass, 2 in front, 1 on the back wall, and each held a flat reflection of the weather, like the sky had left its face there and walked away. A squat stone chimney rose from one side, neat and square, as tidy as hands could make it without love. Smoke climbed from it in a thin line and then laid over in the wind. A gray scarf pulled across the clearing. I hurried to the door. There wasn't one. It took me a stupid minute to understand. The place had a proper front wall where a door should live. A lintel that looked like it remembered a door. Even a little step worn into the dirt. But the boards ran unbroken from corner to corner. No handle, no seam. No crack where light might leak. It felt like a person who keeps their mouth shut so long their lips forget how to part. "Hello?" I called, because that's what you do before you do anything else. "Anyone inside?" Sound came back to me from the trees like a shy animal. The chimney gave a small, contented sigh, and something in me tried to sit down from relief. "Warmth lives here," that sound said. "Warmth means a human somewhere close." I walked the perimeter looking for another entry. On the back wall, a small window sat at shoulder height with a crack shaped like a river. I cupped my hands to the glass and peered into the room. It was simple. A table built from old planks on 2 trestles, a couple of stools, a short iron stove with a pot on it, and a cot tucked against the far wall with a wool blanket folded square at the foot. The stove glowed dull red in its middle. The pot's lid trembled with the laziest steam, and condensation crawled the inside of the glass where my breath touched it. I knocked twice with my knuckle gentle. "Hello?" I said again, softer. Storm rolled in. "I'm cold." Something moved in the small mirror tacked above the table, a sliver of brightness like light shifting across a ring. I leaned left and right to change my angle, but the thing in the mirror didn't match my movement. A thin thread of sound answered me, almost like a kettle beginning to think about singing. I put my ear to the window without shame. Behind the glass, the room was as still as a photograph, but the stove ticked with settling heat. The pot breathed, and the floorboards gave a tiny complaint as if someone had just stepped off them. "Please," I said, and heat flushed my face because the plea came out too quickly. Too human. "I just need to warm up." The smell of the smoke thickened, reached through the crack and ran across my tongue. Pine, then oak, then whatever wood becomes when it has burned many times and learned how to remember. I went back to the front and laid my palm on the wall where a door would be. The board was cold. I pressed my shoulder to it anyway. The way you test an old door that sticks. The cabin did not move. My body asked for radiators and city steam and people, and the mountain gave me wood and stone and a polite refusal. Sleet turned to hard snow in the span of 3 breaths, big flakes sticking to my hat and eyelashes. The wind shifted and drove smoke past me like a coat being offered and then snatched back. I stepped under the eave and stood there with my hands in my armpits looking like patience. I told myself I could pitch my tarp in the lee and make it through. I told myself 100 obvious things while my teeth argued with each other. The window on the front wall clouded and cleared with a small rhythm, fog growing and retreating on the inside of the glass, not with the wind, not with mine. I wiped the outside with my sleeve and made a clear oval. Behind the oval, the room kept on being a room. A cup sat beside the stove now, though I did not remember seeing it before. It was empty and clean, turned upside down on a rag. Someone had set it out for later. I rapped the glass, polite like I was calling on a neighbor. The sound had no place to go. It dulled at my knuckle and died on the pane. The chimney gave another soft breath, deeper now, and the pot's lid clattered once as if it had been tapped by a spoon. I tried the back window again because humans love repeating. The crack in the glass had spread, a little new branch running off the river's curve. I didn't like that, though I couldn't say why. I said my name to the wall. Saying it reminded me that I had one, that the world had carried it this far without dropping it. "I'm just going to wait here a bit," I told the boards, trying to be the kind of person a house might trust. "Then I'll go. I won't make trouble." A shape lifted behind the stove, low to the floor. It could have been heat. It could have been air. It moved with a human rhythm, the way a tired person stands up from kneeling. I almost shouted from the relief of it, but swallowed the sound. I put both hands on the sill and breathed a fog circle on the pane. Through the circle, the cot looked a little mussed, The blanket one fold looser than before, like someone had sat and then stood again. I felt the stupid sting of tears in my eyes and blamed the wind. The cabin breathed smoke, steady and calm, as if to say, "There is warmth here. There is order here. There will be warmth as long as there is wood." The storm hit harder and made its case across the clearing. I understood then that leaving was a choice I did not have, at least not in the next hour. So I did the only thing left to me. I made myself small under the eave, tucked my hands into my sleeves, and waited next to a house that would not let me in, watching my reflection try to live in a window that kept forgetting my face. The storm didn't settle. It decided to stay. Snow stacked itself in tidy corners, then slurred into wet at the edges, then crisped again when the wind turned mean. The clearing shrank under weather until the tree line felt a step away. I pressed my back to the cabin and counted breaths, not to measure time, but to keep myself from listening to the wrong sounds. It didn't work. In a lull, I heard something slide across wood inside, like a chair leg being moved slowly to spare the floor. I went to the back window, because of course I did, and lifted my hands against the glass again. This time I didn't meet only a room. A shape stood near the table, a darker piece of the dim. It had a person's height and a person's stillness. I could not say if it faced me. I thought of a coat hung on a nail, the way it can look like a friend waiting. The pot on the stove released one soft sigh and the lid tapped twice. The cup that had been upside down now lay upright, mouth open, patient. Steam crept along the inside of the window and trembled at the cracked line like it was deciding whether to slip through. "I'm not a thief," I said, ridiculous, explaining myself to glass. "I have food. I have stove fuel. I have a dry shirt. I just need a place to be out of this for a little while." The shape did the same thing the storm did. Nothing, and then more nothing of a different kind. Behind the shape, the small mirror over the table looked like a square of pond. In it, a smear of light moved. Not from me, not from the window, but as if something had passed a hand between the lantern and the glass. I felt a pulse in my throat that belonged to an animal with less memory than me and more sense. I forced myself to step aside from the window, to stop trying to fit myself into a picture that did not include me. I found a spot at the corner, where the snow curled away from the wall, and pulled my pack around. I worked the zipper with cold fingers that wanted gentler work. I dug out the little stove and windscreen, found the dry fuel canister and set them under the eave. The flame rose blue and thin. I put a mug of snow on top and watched it turn to water, the metal sweating as if relieved. I thought about making coffee and then decided on broth because I wanted salt to make me real. As the water began to tremble, the cabin's chimney changed its mind about me. The wind sent the smoke across my face and it lingered. Not acrid, not rich, just present. The way a stranger's breath is when they lean in to ask the time. I leaned away without meaning to. The steam from my mug lifted in the same shape, and for a second the two threads twined. The feeling that followed was not fear. It was shame, old and simple, the feeling of taking warmth that isn't yours. I turned off my stove. It felt like apology. The cabin answered with a pop from the iron and a sudden lick of shadow on the back wall where firelight must have moved. I went to the front window and looked in with the strictness of a person trying not to see more than exists. The chair by the table had shifted. The cup was closer to the edge. There was a second cup now, turned upside down the way the first had been. I thought about my earlier words. I have food. I have stove fuel. And felt the stupid quick warmth of being heard. Would you like some? I asked the glass, and then I laughed short and ugly because I could not pour anything through a wall. The cabin handled my joke like it handled everything else. Quietly. Then the smallest thing in the world happened. At the crack in the back window, a tiny V branching off the curve, I saw a line of wet grow and then narrow, as if a tongue had pressed there on the inside. The fog around that point cleared. I set my finger against the matching spot outside. The cold bit hard. I held it there until I thought I could see the shape of the tip through the glass. My finger and whatever waited inside almost touching at the edge of a fracture. "Okay," I said, to the idea that we were having a conversation. "Okay." I slid down the wall until I sat on my heels. The snow made small noises at my boots, the way snow does when it changes its mind about staying snow. I took the dry shirt from my pack and wrapped it around my hands. "Tell me how," I said, and felt foolish, and then less foolish, and then not foolish at all. Because when the wind dropped, I heard a faint clatter from inside, quick, delicate sounds, like a person who knows a room well, placing things in neat order. There was, I realized, one opening to the cabin that could be both door and not, the stovepipe at the top of the chimney. It was a narrow throat, but it was throat enough for warm air to carry scent and something else small to go either way. I stood, stepped out from under the eave and looked up into the gray. The snow ticked against my face like old TV static. Above me, the smoke went up a foot, then turned and lay flat like a hand. I took a thin strip of birch bark from my pocket, the kind I keep for starting fires, and fed it to the wind. It caught a corner flame and curled. I held it at arm's length to the smoke as an offering. The smoke reached down to meet it. I can't explain this part without sounding like I'm giving human verbs to weather, but I have no other verbs that fit. The smoke bent lower than before, lower than wind alone would press, and touched the little flame on my bark. The flame turned pale for a second, then steadied brighter like someone had cupped it. Heat lifted across my knuckles. I smelled oak, then a hint of something sweet like cornmeal, then ash as simple as old paper. When the bark burned to a curl, I let it fall. The smoke rose back to its place like a polite guest returning to their seat. "Thank you," I said before I could stop the habit of my mouth. The shape inside the cabin moved in the mirror, one small sway, as if someone had nodded, which is a thing we do when gratitude makes us shy. I should have left then. I should have taken that odd benediction and walked away into weather, and earned my own warmth far from the temptation of this house. Instead, I found a second strip of bark, lit it and held it higher. A gust shoved snow into my face, a cold hand to the mouth. The flame faltered. The smoke did not bend this time. It went straight up and ignored me. The lesson was simple and I hated it. Ask once, receive once. "Stop, understood," I said, and meant it. I drifted along the wall to the front again, the window fogged with a slow inside breath. I wiped my oval and looked in because I could not help myself. The second cup on the table now sat upright next to the first. Two small mouths waited at the edge. My name felt heavy in my throat, and the cabin felt like a mouth that knew how to say it. A clack came from the stove, door, latch, I couldn't tell, and then a soft ring from metal knocked by a spoon. I stood out there in snow and thought about the simplest, worst thought in the world. I could go around back, crack that window a little wider, and it would not be breaking in. Not exactly. I went around back. The old putty at the frame had pulled away in one corner where the crack ran. The wood there was soft, a little punky with time. I slid the tip of my knife under and eased. The pain gave a complaining mew. The sound went straight through me in a line I'll remember when my memory has lost other lines. I stopped. The wind hissed a no through the trees. I tried again. Softer, and the glass shifted by the width of a thread. Warmth breathed out, real, fine, good, and placed itself on my face as if fitting a mask. From inside, a single human sound came clear and unmistakable. A footstep, not the old groan of a board, not the tick of iron, the quick, soft step of a barefoot finding wood in a place it knows. It moved toward me. It stopped the same distance from the window that I stood from it. A thin seam between us, poor and perfect. I put my hand flat to the cold glass and knew, without seeing, that a hand rested against the warm glass on the other side. "Please," I said, and I didn't know anymore if I was asking to enter or asking what was inside to come out. The smoke thickened in my nose. The warmth grew past comfort into the kind of heat that makes you sleepy in dangerous ways. Another footstep, this time small, like a child's. Another. And then from above on the roof a little run of patters as if rain had learned to use feet. I looked up and saw only snow. The sound came again, urgent, many light steps, then silence like a decision. When I faced the window again, my breath froze to the glass in a round flower. Behind it nothing moved. The crack along the pane looked a little longer, and a tiny grain of ice clung there the way a tear clings to a lash. I closed my knife. I put both hands on the frame and pressed the glass back into place as well as I could. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words made a small cloud that rose and broke. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." The cabin answered with a sound I will hear when I'm old. The two cups on the table knocked together once gently in a toast for people who don't drink. Then the pot settled and the stove ticked and the smoke climbed true without bending. And in that quiet the storm remembered its job and smothered all the edges again. When the light began to fade from bad to worse, I made the only choice left to me. I would walk out in the storm, slow and stubborn, and put as much ground as I could between my body and this house that breathed like a living thing. The cabin had given me nothing, and exactly enough. I had taken almost nothing and too much. I put my damp gloves back on and felt their cold honesty. I tightened my pack like a decision, and stepped from the eave into the heavier air. The trees closed, grateful to take me back. Snow simplified the trail into a suggestion, then into the memory of one. I followed the grade with my knees and the creek with my ears, moving the way tired animals move in weather, low and narrow. Behind me, the smoke climbed until the wind took it. I did not look back, because I have learned the cost of looking is always higher than the price on the tag. Still, the cabin came with me. Not the wood and the iron. The breath. Every 100 steps the air would go warm for just a second, like I had walked through the ghost of a kitchen. Once, in a hollow where the wind should have sat down and sulked, I smelled cornmeal again like fried Johnny cake, and my stomach turned with a hunger that felt older than me. Once, in a tangle of laurel, I heard the soft knock of cups meeting, and I put my gloved fist against a trunk to stop the urge to knock back. At the creek crossing, where the water ran brown and stubborn under a film of weak ice, I crouched to chew stones and felt heat lift over the surface like the river had learned to steam. A little pocket of clear rose from the ice and popped without sound. A thread of fog slid along the bank with a direction it should not have. I stepped wide and slow, and kept my hands out where I could see them. The water licked my boot, then forgot my name. I made the road late when the world goes that blue that doesn't belong to sky. The sign at the trailhead had a thin rime on it, and the letters looked like they had been carefully drawn by a child with cold fingers. I laughed once because my body had to discharge something. My car was a black shape with a white hat. I brushed the windshield with my forearm and the wipers did the rest with an old good sound. Inside, the heater took a year to become kind. The radio turned itself on, as radios love to do when you do not need them, and hissed. A station tried to find itself and then gave up. For a full minute the speakers breathed the exact rhythm of a chimney. Slow pull, slow give, a pause like a thought. Then a small voice rode the static and said the only word I didn't want to hear. Please. It sounded like a person trying not to ask. It sounded like someone had learned that word recently. Took care with the P, kissed the L, swallowed the S without pride. I put my finger on the power button and did not press. The heater warmed my knuckles to the edge of comfort. I said simply, "I can't," and turned the radio off. Halfway to town, the air in the car went sweet for a flash, like apple peels on a hot stove. I drove with both hands on the wheel and both eyes on the wet black seam ahead. At a stop sign, the fog in the trees moved wrong for the wind, as if a house had exhaled where there was no house to breathe. I kept going. At home, the building smelled like tired carpet and someone's dinner and a metal handrail that stays cold even in June. In my kitchen, I set my pack on the floor, and the sound it made felt too loud for my small rooms. I turned the stove on because humans return to ritual when we've forgotten what else to do. The kettle sang its normal song, and I made tea I did not want. Steam walked up my face and touched my eyes, and I cried for the first time since the weather had changed its mind above me. When I carried the mug to the table, 2 cups waited there. I don't mean literal cups. I mean the space on the wood remembered how 2 cups look when they rest. Rings lay there, pale and perfect, one beside the other, wet ghosts pressed into the grain. I wiped them with my palm, and they stayed. The tea cooled. I didn't sit. I stood there in the doorway and decided how to live in a house that had listened to another house breathing. I made rules. Simple ones that even a scared animal could keep. I wouldn't eat over the sink like a lonely man. I would sit at the table to drink, and I would set 1 cup down and leave the space beside it empty. I would never boil water without lifting the pot when it clicked to simmer and say, "That's enough," out loud. I would open the kitchen window even in winter when I cooked, to let the breath out. I would not speak to the kettle. I would not speak to the vent. I would speak to myself and the walls, so the walls knew my voice first. For days, nothing asked anything of me. I worked. I slept hard and dumb. Once, waking between sleep and morning, I smelled oak and cornmeal, and thought I heard the polite knock of cups again, very far away. I whispered, "No," and the sound became a normal pipe settling in the cold. A week later, the ranger called me back. He sounded like fluorescent light does. Tired, honest. He said they had gone up after the storm to check the spur. He said, they found windfall, a washed-out footbridge, and not much else. Then he paused in a way I could see over the phone. "There's an old chimney at a clearing near there," he said. "Just a stack. No cabin around it. No boards in the snow. But the top's clean. No snow on the cap. That means someone's keeping it warm." He might have expected me to laugh. I didn't. He said they'd make a note for winter hikers. Bad weather setups, old structures, use caution, don't count on shelter. He asked if I was all right. I told him yes and no and yes, which is the most true I could be. He said to call if I saw anything. I promised what I could. That night after the dishes, I turned the kettle's knob to low and watched the steam thin like hair. I set my cup down and made room beside it for the ring that would not come. I rested my hand on the wood and felt the table hold me up. In the far edge of hearing, a chimney somewhere took a slow pull, and then gave it back, like a person who has learned to breathe with a little less. I still walk. When weather turns, I turn with it. When smoke rises where no house stands, I let it be weather. On cold mornings, if the window fogs in a way that looks like a handprint, I open the sash with the gentleness I use on my own face. Sometimes I think about the 2 cups knocking together like a toast for people who can't stand it anymore. I pour tea into 1 cup and leave the other clean and upside down. And if that offends whatever listens, it can learn my rules. You asked for the scariest thing. It isn't the bare foot on the boards or the smoke that bends. It's the warmth. How easy it is to want it when it isn't yours. How close you come to trading your name for it when weather decides to change its mind. If you find that cabin, and I think you might, because some places look for us, stand under the eave and be cold. Thank the smoke. Don't ask twice. When the cup knocks, knock back only with your breath. Then leave while you still know which parts of you are you, and which parts a house could learn by heart. I took the county job because I needed steady pay and because numbers had always been kinder to me than people. Counting is simple. You start at 1, and if you keep your finger on the paper and your eyes in the right place, you end at the same number every time. That was how I thought before I drove into the hollow. They sent me with a clipboard, a badge on a lanyard, a county map printed in faint green, and a cheerful talk from a supervisor who had never driven these roads. You'll verify the ridge communities, most of them old parcels. Knock, ask, record occupants. If no one answers, note it. If there's a language barrier, we have cards. He tapped the stack like it was armor. People out there like privacy, but the county needs a clean count. Be polite, be firm, and don't take it personal. The road turned to patchwork and then to patched dirt, the kind you apologize to your shocks for. I drove past a church that looked tired even in sunlight. Its bell rope looped like a noose over a nail. Mailboxes leaned in little congregations at the start of unmarked drives. Names half faded, some handwritten in block letters by hands that didn't trust paint. The air smelled like wood smoke and laundry on a cold line. It was October, but it felt like the last good day of a kind of weather. My list said there should be 14 occupied homes on the ridge, maybe 16 if the trailers hadn't been pulled. The county map showed a scatter of little squares and a line that pretended to be a road. I parked where the surface got serious about ending and walked from there. My boots found a path the map had not, that old pressed-down grass track made by years of the same footsteps. I told myself I was here to count, not to make sense. I said those words out loud because sometimes your mouth needs to hear you. The first 2 houses were simple. Old clapboard with patches, smoke from a stovepipe. Dogs that barked like they'd met census workers before and had a list of complaints. An older woman in a thick sweater answered the door and looked at my badge as if it were something a kid brought home from school. She told me her name, her husband's, the 3 grown sons who had moved to Ohio and sent their mother pictures of men with short haircuts and soft bellies. She told me no one else stayed in the house. I stood on the porch and felt the heat slip out past her shoulder and touch my hands without permission. I wrote the number 2. I felt good about the neatness of it. The 3rd house sat back in a stand of poplar that had agreed to be a yard. The paint had let go years ago. The porch sagged in a careful way like an old man who won't complain. When I knocked, the door swung inward by itself and the smell that came out was not rot. It was food, recent food, a little fat on a hot pan, a little coffee. "Hello?" I called, pushing my voice into corners with the most respectful force I had. "County census. Anyone home?" The kitchen was tidy. A pan sat on the stove, rinsed and turned upside down to dry. The table held a salt shaker and a pepper can with a dent in its side. There were dishes on the rack that had been set there by someone who cared if plates stayed chipped. A chair had been pulled out from the table and not yet pushed back. I stood in the doorway because I have rules, and I said again, "Hello?" The room made the small sounds rooms make when wood cools. A draft moved across my knuckles and up my sleeve like it knew my name. The hairs stood along my forearm and I told them to sit. They didn't. I wrote 1 on my sheet and felt like I was lying. I stepped backward to the porch and the door, polite as any host, closed a little more by itself. "Occupied," I wrote. "No contact." I wanted to count the chair. I wanted to count the smell. I didn't. Numbers are for people. The 5th place because the 4th was a trailer, with nobody in it and a calendar in the window turned to May, was a house I would have called cheerful if I didn't know how cheer dies in winter. Yellow paint, a hand-built flower box gone to brown sticks, a patch of marigolds with a few stubborn heads still bright. I knocked and the door opened by a thumb's width and stopped. A voice from deeper inside said, "We don't need anything." It was a woman's voice, not old, not young, turned flat by the kind of work that keeps you from answering your own questions. "County census," I said. "It's not a sale. I just need to verify how many live in the home and your names for the record." Silence, the length of counting to 5. "Then 4, she said. "Me, my man, our girl, and my brother." There was a sound then. A small shoe tapping at wood somewhere, not at the door, deeper in. "No more?" I asked, because that is what the script told me to say when the number was said quickly. "No more." The woman's voice, softer now, not angry, tired. "You want names, you come back when he's here." "When is that?" Evening, after he sees to the smoke. The way she said smoke made it a job, like cutting wood or carrying water. The small tapping sound stopped. I wrote 4 and return and moved on. Because part of my politeness is knowing when to leave a thing alone until later. The hollow turned on itself the way water will. And I followed a slope that wanted to be steeper. A chimney stood alone at the corner of a clearing. Bricks neat, mortar tidy, but no house around it, not even a foundation. It was the kind of sight my grandfather would have nodded at and said old places, like the words meant more than the 2 they are. I didn't mark it because chimneys don't get to count. I kept going. By mid-afternoon, my page had numbers that made a shape. 8 houses, 6 answers, 2 notes for verify later. The wind picked up and pushed the trees into a low conversation. I came around a bend of brush and found a small cluster of homes I hadn't expected. 3 squatting like brothers. 1 with a tin roof that had learned the trick of staying even through storms. Smoke rose from 2 of their stacks in a slow, respectful way. The third had no smoke and a blue tarp tacked over a broken window. As I stepped into that little clearing, a dog trotted out from under a porch, tail low but not tucked. He looked like every mutt that has ever learned every human smell. He came to my knee, sniffed the badge, decided it wasn't food, and sat, heavy and certain like he'd been waiting. "Good boy," I said, because some words are not optional. The dog's head turned and he looked toward the house with the tarp, the one with no smoke. He didn't whine. He didn't do any movie thing. He just looked and then looked back at me like he had asked a question and would accept the answer I chose. I knocked. No one came. The door was shut and stayed shut like it meant it. "County census," I said to the wood, and to the air around it, because people sometimes stand in air when they are choosing to be quiet. "I'll leave a card." The wind changed and a whiff of something came from under the door. Not rot, not cooking, something like a wet stove that forgot why it was warm. I put the card in the jam. The dog leaned into my shin 1 second like he was steadying me. Then he went back under the porch and put his chin on his paws like that was that. The house next door had smoke. The woman who answered was younger than me by a lot and had hair tied back with a strip of red cloth. She gave me 4 names without making me earn them. Her eyes were flat but not unfriendly. When I asked about the neighbor, the tarp, she looked at my badge and then at the long edge of the sky like she was reading something there. "They'll be back," she said. "They don't like to talk when the count is on." "The count?" "County count." She lifted her chin at my clipboard. "They never open when we're being numbered." The way she said "we" made it a long word. "How many live there?" I asked and kept my tone in that careful place between hard and soft. She looked at the ground between our boots and said, 2. Then after a breath and without lifting her eyes she said, "Sometimes 3. Which is it?" I tried to ask it without putting any sharp on the edge. She lifted her eyes then, and they had the tired anger people get when they know the math is wrong and can't fix it. "Depends when you look," she said. "Sometimes the chimney breathes more than smoke." I thanked her in my job voice and wrote 2 on my sheet because that is what was asked of me. When I turned away, I penciled a small dot next to the number the way I do when I know a sum will not stay put. I finished the loop with enough light to make the road before dark. At the place where the dirt meets real asphalt, I pulled over and read my own writing with the heater running because the wind had found my bones. My total said 14 people on the ridge. 14 was a clean number. It made a shape in my head and a weight in my hand. I should have felt the neatness of it. I should have felt done. Instead, I kept seeing a chair not pushed in, a coffee smell in a room with no one in it, a dog who asked without asking, a woman who said sometimes 3, and then gave me the look people give when they know better than to argue with a number. I put the heater lower. I wrote 1 more line at the bottom of the page where there was no space for it. Voices? Then I laughed at myself because I'm not a writer. I'm a counter. I pulled back onto the road, and the trees closed behind me like they were drawing a curtain on a show that isn't finished yet. I went back the next evening like I said I would. Dusk in the hollow is its own weather. The light is blue in a way that never shows up right in photographs. Sound bends differently too. You can hear a hammer from a long way off and not hear your own boot until it steps on the porch. I parked at the same place and started the same walk with a thermos of coffee because my hands wanted a job besides knocking. At the yellow house, smoke curled from the stack in a soft thread. When I knocked, the door opened less than yesterday. The woman's face in the gap looked like a person listening to a slow radio. "He's out," she said before I could say my script. "He won't be long." "I can wait," I said, and I meant it. I'm good at waiting. It's half my work. She hesitated, then opened the door enough for me to see the edge of the kitchen and a child sitting at a table with a book. The child didn't look up. "You can sit," she said, tipping her head toward a chair by the wall. I thanked her and didn't step inside. She watched me not step inside, and a small relief moved across her mouth like a bird cutting the sky once. She brought me a chipped mug with coffee that had sat on heat a while. It was better than anything I had in my thermos. "Thank you," I said. My hands loved the heat. "You're welcome," she said, and closed the door again with her body between us like a door within a door. I stood on the porch and sipped. Down the hollow, a hammer tapped iron in a regular, patient way, not fast, not slow, like a person who wants a thing to be straight more than they want to be done. The smoke from the chimney lifted and then lay down like tired. At my feet, a small, wet footprint dried in the slant of colder air. It was not a child's. It was the shape of a boot without tread, flat and long, the kind of sole a man wears when he never buys new shoes. I looked up the road and saw no one coming. The hammer went quiet mid-tap. A minute later, a man stepped into sight, walking like the road convinced him to come along, not the other way. He carried a length of stovepipe on one shoulder and a short-handled hammer in the other hand. He had the kind of face the ridge makes, cut by weather, lined early by work, eyes set to see far. He nodded at me once on the porch, then looked at the door, and the door opened because it knew his knock without sound. "Evening," he said to me without stopping. "Evening," I said back, and did not put my hand out because I have learned when not to. Inside, I heard the small comfort sounds of a house accepting its own people. He set the pipe down, set the hammer down, set a third thing down that I hadn't seen in his hands. The soft cloth sound of a blanket being placed in the room. The child turned a page. The stove ticked. The woman said his name, not loud, not soft, in a tone that holds a life in it. He said hers back in the same tone. The whole house breathed. I stood on the porch and warmed my hands on the borrowed cup and pretended the breath was mine. He stepped back out a minute later, looked at my badge, then into my face. "You the counter," he said. Not a question, I nodded. "We're 4, he said. "She told you right." He lifted his chin down the road toward the houses with the dog and the tarp. "You're asking there too?" "I am," I said. "No answer yesterday. 2 on record. Maybe 3. He scratched his jaw with the hammer hand, not thinking about the weight. 2, he said. Then, after a beat, "Mostly 2. "Mostly," I repeated, because that word will always do more work than people think. "Who is the third when it's 3? He looked past me the way a man looks when he's learned that saying a thing makes it heavier. "Brother," he said finally. "Used to be a brother, used to be. He's not counted now. Because he passed," I said carefully to be kind, and also because dead people don't count on my form. He took a long breath and let half of it out. "Because he won't be counted," he said. "Not by you. Not by paper." He looked at my clipboard and then at the street like he was choosing an answer. "He comes back on count days and checks the pipe. That's all." The hairs on my arm stood again. The coffee in my hand decided to be cold at the edges. "He checks the pipe," I said, and that sentence felt like a thing I would remember in a year without deciding to. The man nodded once. "Chimney breathes right or the house goes wrong," he said. "That's the work. You know how to watch a stove, you know how to keep a house. He knows it. He comes when the counting starts and leaves when you quit." He set the hammer head on the railing and leaned on the handle. "You going to write that?" I looked at the neat little boxes on my form and the straight little lines in their straight little rows. "No," I said. "I don't have a box for it." "Good," he said, and not unkindly. "It don't like paper." He straightened. "You going to that tarp place tonight?" "I was," I said, and saw his mouth almost say a thing and then change its mind. He nodded. "Then go now," he said. "Before the number gets thick." I don't know what I expected at the tarp house. Maybe a door that opened. Maybe the dog under the porch to come out and decide I was worth his time. Instead, I found the door just as shut, the tarp just as blue, the porch swept newly of leaves like someone had done it with a wide hand. I knocked and said my script and wanted a script for when houses are stubborn. The wind came down the ridge and made the tarp speak in a ripple. I put my ear to the wood and felt stupid. I heard nothing that was human. Then I heard something that made my heart trip over itself. Counting. Not out loud. Not numbers. A soft, steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. As if a hand were marking time against the inside of the door. Not knocking. Counting. My breath came too quick. I knocked once and the tapping stopped. The silence that followed had weight. The dog under the porch sighed in the voice of old animals. "County," I said to the wood. And I thought about how many times that word has been spoken at doors that did not want it, and how many times it did not matter. A breeze moved behind me, not from the road, from the hill. It brought the smell of smoke that remembered rooms. I turned and saw a thin line lifting from beyond the house, not from a stack, just from the ground where an old chimney might have been if one had ever been. It rose and then bent and laid itself toward the door. I stepped back off the porch without planning it. "I'll come back tomorrow," I said to no one and to someone. The tapping started again, faster now, tap, 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 tap. Then stopped as if a hand had been caught and let go. On my way out of the cluster, the young woman with the red cloth in her hair stood in her doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't cold. People hold themselves like that when they want to keep their shape. "Did you get your numbers?" she asked, almost smiling at the futility of the question. "Mostly," I said. "Mostly too." She nodded and then looked down at my page like she could see through it. "You put those on paper," she said, "and leave the other part in the air. It belongs there." "I can do that," I said. She watched me a second longer and then went inside without the small goodbye people use when they know you'll come again. The door closed soft. The smoke in the clearing lay a little flatter and then lifted again, a slow breath that had learned manners. By the time I reached the yellow house again, the man had gone and the woman handed me a torn-off corner of a brown paper bag with 4 names written in neat letters. Last names first, as if she had known how the county wanted it without being told. "In case you don't make it back," she said. "For your form." "Thank you," I said, and meaning it. "I'll be back." She looked at my face long enough to know if I was lying. Whatever she found was good enough for now. I left the hollow with 13 written and 1 mostly, which is not how numbers like to be, and the knowledge that I had been allowed to hear a thing I should never write. The road let me go. The ridge kept me. I felt it the way you feel a hand on your back that is light and firm and not letting you fall yet. I went back the 3rd day because the box on my form that said complete would not let me sleep. The 3rd day smelled like old rain and new iron. A front had wandered through in the night and left behind the kind of wind that keeps a man awake and tells a house what it needs to fix. I brought extra forms because hope is silly and useful. I told myself I would get the tarp house to answer, or I would declare it unoccupied per procedure. Saying per procedure in my head doesn't make me brave. It makes me small in a way I forgive. At the start of the ridge road, a line of laundry moved on a rope like a choir. Shirts lifted their sleeves to nobody. A woman with a face that could have been 40 or 60 waved her chin at me as if I had come to repair a roof. I waved back because my mother had taught me to wave before I learned to count. The dog at the cluster met me halfway and then didn't, as if he had changed jobs. He walked ahead of me and then to the side and then went still with his nose in the air. Smoke again. Not much, not high. Like a stove breathing gentler in a house that has learned not to be greedy for heat. The door of the tarp house stood open, only a little. An inch, maybe less. The blue tarp fluttered against the broken window like a flag that belonged to someone who had moved. I climbed the steps slow because the sound of my foot on that wood felt like stepping into a story I didn't deserve. "County," I said, and my voice had a wobble I didn't like. "Permission to enter?" I was asking the air. I was asking the old paint. I was asking the number 3 to let me leave it alone. Inside, the air had the smell of a place that keeps itself decent even when no one is there to admire it. A broom leaned by the stove. A pot sat cold. 2 cups stood on the table, one upright, one turned over like a conversation interrupted. A chair had a sweater over its back, the kind of sweater a man wears until it is a second skin. The sink held a plate, rinsed, tilted to dry. The floor had a squashed line in the dust where a small foot had run from one room to another without lifting. There was no one in the room, and the room was not empty. I stood in the doorway long enough to feel rude. "Hello?" I said, and my voice went toward the back. A breath answered that wasn't mine. Not a wind, not a furnace. The kind of breath a person takes when they decide not to cry. I put my badge where it could be seen, and stepped one pace inside because the county likes a man to say he tried. "I'm here to verify occupants," I said to the house. "It's just paperwork." The room decided to be quiet. The dog outside put his chin on the threshold like a witness. In the back bedroom, a bed stood made, corners neat the way people who have known corners are neat. On the dresser in a cheap frame was a photograph. 4 people, a woman with hair braided tight, a man holding a little girl who wears a serious face because the camera asked her to, another man behind them with his hand on the first man's shoulder, smiling like he let out the laugh he meant to save. I counted with my eyes because I could not help it. 4. I turned the frame and saw in pencil different hands had written the same names I had on my paper. 4. Someone had scratched a 5th mark in the corner and then erased it with a spit thumb. The paper still remembered. The stove ticked in the other room. I went back and stood by it because warmth is a strong gravity. The stovepipe had a patch of fresher metal where it had been replaced. A neat job. I touched the seam with my finger and felt the faintest warmth, not from fire, from use. The kind of warmth a man's hand leaves when he checks work. The kind of warmth that says the pipe will draw right. The smoke will not come back into the room, the house will breathe. Behind me, the door tapped twice against its jamb as if a breeze put a finger there and then changed its mind. I turned and saw the blue tarp lift and lay down like it had to remember how to be a window. In the light that fell across the table, dust moved like notes in a song we don't know. I wrote 2 on my form for this address, and underneath it, where there was no box for such a thing, I wrote mostly. Then I wrote child sometimes because the county likes clean answers, and this was the cleanest I had. When I stepped back onto the porch, the dog stood and shook his coat into order. The man from the yellow house was in the yard with his hammer, tightening a bracket on his stack. He didn't look over. He didn't have to. "Got your numbers?" he said to the air. "Mostly," I said. "Good," he said, and hit the bracket once in that exact careful way. "Leave them be now." I walked the rest of the ridge and knocked on doors that looked like doors. I asked my questions and wrote my numbers and let people talk if they wanted, because sometimes all I have to give is ears. At the last house where the road curves back like a question mark, an old man in a brown sweater had me sit on his porch steps and told me about floods I had never seen. He said, "We count what counts." I said, "By whose rule?" He laughed with his whole face and said, "By what keeps us in winter." On my way out, I stopped at the church with the slack bell rope and stood in the doorway because no door should be walked by twice in a day without someone telling it thank you. The dim inside held that old wood smell that churches keep whether they are used or not. On the little table by the door where hymnals once sat, there was a stack of papers from some older count. The county crest, boxes, lines, numbers like neat fences. Under the stack was only one thing written by hand on a scrap of ledger torn from a book. It said, "When the counting starts, watch your pipe." Underneath, smaller, "When the counting stops, don't answer." I left the paper where it was because I had learned to put some things back. I drove to the county office with my neat form that said 14 and sometimes mostly, and laid it on the pile where other neat forms live. My supervisor flipped through with 2 fingers and said, "Good job. On time." He stamped and I watched the black square kiss the boxes like a tire track. "Any issues?" he asked without looking. "No," I said, and then, because I am not a liar, I said, "Not for paper." On my way home, the car radio found a station where an old voice was singing a hymn I knew from being a child in a town that thought it owned the sky. The singer held the last note long, the way old singers do when they know a room will hold it. As I turned off the ridge road, smoke rose at my back, thin and steady. Chimney after chimney after chimney, each one lifting a slow breath and laying it down easy like a rule that has kept a people alive. I still do the job. I still like numbers. I still know the comfort of a column that adds up. But when the count comes due now, I keep a small corner on my paper for the part that isn't mine. I write mostly where mostly lives. I put my ear near a door, and if I hear tapping that sounds like time instead of knuckles, I step back. I say, "I'll return tomorrow," even when I won't, because tomorrow is where some truths belong. If you ever take this job, or any job that tries to put a fence around people, remember what the ridge taught me. Some homes are counted by paper and some by smoke. When you're in a place that breathes, be polite. Don't force the door. If the dog leans against your leg for 1 second, accept it. If a woman writes 4 names on brown paper and hands them to you like she's passing a little fire, take them. And don't ask who the 5th is. And when the counting stops, don't answer. Let the house breathe out the last of the count and return to its numbers. The ones that kept it through winters before we were born and will keep it through winters after we stop needing to be added up.
I used to think trail colors were for tourists. Blue for ridges, white for spines, red for side routes that look pretty on maps and punish your knees in real life. The map for this section of the Appalachians showed a faint red spur cutting off the main trail, dropping toward a creek, then rejoining near a fire road. A shortcut if you trusted paper more than weather. I didn't plan to take it. I planned to camp by the shelter with everyone else, trading jokes and stove fuel and lies about mileage in the orange light. That was the plan until the day dimmed too fast and the wind came up the valley with a smell like iron water and old pennies. The forest around me went quiet in that listening way, and somewhere upridge a voice screamed the way a rabbit screams when a hawk gets its math right. I knew better than to go looking for it. I also knew better than to stay where the timber went dark like a door closing. The red spur started at a white oak with a blaze that looked freshly painted. I don't know if that's true. I only know the paint was bright in the last light and the bark looked like it had learned to wear it. I told myself I'd drop fast, hit the creek, cross at the old footbridge, and come up on the gravel road in time to walk the last mile by phone light. I told myself 3 simple sentences because simple sentences are what you use when you want your legs to listen. The red marks led into laurel and then into a slope of leaf mat that worked like ice under my boots. The air got colder and cleaner and meaner. I kept my headlamp off to save batteries and let my eyes adjust. The red path was honest for the first 10 minutes. Paint every few trunks, the trail a narrow runnel stamped by feet that believed in shortcuts. Then it began to change tone. The blazes appeared farther apart. Some looked rubbed, as if a hand had tested them and found them wanting. The dirt under my boots darkened until it wasn't brown anymore. It was deep gray, almost black, like wet slate. When my lamp finally clicked on, the ground ahead glowed a bruised color, not red like paint, but red like memory. like something once bled here and the dirt had kept the rumor. I don't spook easy. I spook smart. I stopped and listened the way hunters listen. Chin up, mouth open, letting air across the soft place behind my teeth because sound likes that path. Nothing but wind and one branch complaining without rhythm. I moved again, careful. The path sank toward the creek with a logic I recognized from 100 other gullies. The headlamp caught the white shock of water and the slick curve of old logs. The footbridge had become 3 steps of varnish-smooth trunk with a chain handrail on one side. I put one foot down, tested, shifted my weight. It held. On the second step, a sound came up from the dark water like a voice talking through gravel. Not words, not animal. A note you feel in your teeth. I stopped. The handrail chain trembled. Not with my weight, with something moving the other end. I raised the beam and saw a shape at the far post. For a second, I thought it was a bear. For a second, I thought it was nothing. Then the light resolved it into an old trail sign fallen on its edge. Swinging in a wind, the creek made all by itself. The letters were gone. The red paint at the edge was not. I crossed and felt my brain do that small clap it does when a little danger is behind you. The path on the other side narrowed into a rib of ground between steep drop and steeper laurel. My lamp picked up prints in the damp. Boot prints, not fresh, toe-in like a person who's always going downhill. The left impression sat deeper than the right in the way that makes me think of people I've loved and the injuries they carry forward. I followed because that's how paths work. They pull at your ankles while your head tries to make the pulling mean something. Somewhere above me, far away, a barred owl worked through its old song, "Who cooks for you?" And the second line drifted off like it had lost interest in the recipe. The red blazes turned stingy. I started counting paces between them, then stopped because counting is how you teach a path your heartbeat. Instead, I told myself stories about warm things I could list, like stoves and hands and rooms that keep their heat. The ground underfoot went from black to the color of dried clay and then very slowly to red, real red, iron red, the kind you get when water sees too much rock and keeps the stain. It wasn't wet. It wasn't fresh. It was the kind of old that believes in itself. It ran in a stripe down the center of the trail, thin as a ribbon in places, wide as a scarf in others. I bent with my lamp grazing the ground and saw that it wasn't paint, wasn't dye, wasn't even silt settled on top. The red lived in the top layer of dirt the way a rumor lives in a small town. Everywhere lightly permanent. Ahead, the ridge should have opened to the road in a quarter mile. The trees didn't agree. They leaned in to hear something I couldn't. A shape moved to my right. Low, fast, the size of a dog maybe, and vanished with no sound at all. I froze and made my body a house for breath. Nothing. The lamp halo shook a little and made the laurel look like it was thinking. A twig snapped behind me, tidy and small. Pivoted. The red path was a clean lane back to the creek. No eyes, no bodies. Just the long, careful smear of color pointing downhill like a tongue laid out for an old test. That's when I heard the footsteps. They weren't mine. They weren't trying to be quiet. They came the way a person comes in boots that learned a place long ago. Not running, not stalking, not lost, carrying on. The first 3 I thought were echoes, my own heel. Then the 4th fell out of time. Then the 5th, and my chest found that old cold everyone learns the first time they're followed by something that won't commit to catching up. I turned my lamp off and listened. The steps paused too, with a polite patience I hated. I snapped the light on again and swept the beam. Laurel. The white wound of a birch trunk. My own breath like steam from a small machine. No figure. I wanted the road so badly I could feel tar under my tongue. I pushed on. The ribbon of red swelled across the whole width of the trail now. A dull, brick-dark band that my boots couldn't avoid. Every 3rd step a smell lifted from it. Not rot, not blood, not iron. Something like old smoke spilled on a wet floor. The "who cooks for you" call floated once more, far left now, and ended in a cough. My lamp picked up something ahead. Post. The road sign. Relief rose up like heat, dumb and generous. I walked faster. What I saw when I came out of the trees was not the road. It was a small, empty pullout stamped into red dirt, the kind trucks make when they need a place to turn their thoughts around. No gravel, no fresh tire. At the edge of it, a wooden trail board leaned at a tired angle. The map under cloudy plastic showed exactly where I stood, exactly wrong. It said the red spur touched a gravel road and a ranger gate. The plastic had fogged from inside. My reflection sat there in the sheen like a person in a bus window. A bright flash hit the map. I flinched. It wasn't lightning. It was a light snap twice, a headlamp or a phone, 2 short blinks. Off to the right, deeper into the growth, at the start of a track I hadn't seen, another red blaze took the light and showed me a way the map didn't admit. The footsteps behind me took 1 step closer and stopped, waiting for my decision like a dog that's learned not to lead without permission. "I'm staying on the marked trail," I said out loud to myself, to the red smear, to whoever wore those boots. "Marked trail only." The 2-blink light answered, patient, almost pleased, as if to say, "This is the marked trail now." I stepped onto the new red and the air went colder in a very clean way, like putting your face to a glass door in winter. Far off, a siren climbed and fell, and for a second I loved it the way people love bells. The new path narrowed, then widened, then narrowed again like it was measuring me as we went. Every 20 steps the ground showed a new cut, small and round and shallow. Cups pressed into soil, not boots, not hooves, not any track I knew. They lined the red in neat rows, 12 to a ring, the little dent in the center darker than the rest. My lamp wanted to rest on that center. My eyes kept moving because I have learned that mercy is not always the same shape as attention. At the first bend, a voice called my name. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't a lover or a friend. It was a voice a person uses on a porch at night when they don't want to wake the baby. I knew it because I know my name. It did not belong to anyone I love, and it did not belong to no one either. "Here," it said. The second word was an old one. "Please." The steps behind me took 1 more step and then went quiet like a teacher who wants a child to answer their own question. I did the ugliest smart thing I know. I kept walking, and I did not answer my name. The red underfoot looked black for a moment, then red again, then black, the way blood looks in movies when a director forgets that nothing shines in forests at night except eyes. That was when the path turned and showed me the gate. It wasn't a ranger gate. It was older, 2 posts and a crossbeam. Not tall, not grand. Moss wet where hands don't touch. Hanging from the crosspiece was a loop of rusted chain with a broken clasp. The kind that's meant to keep cattle from learning people's shortcuts. Nailed to 1 post was a plank with words I couldn't read because someone had scraped them off with exactly the care you give when you want meaning to remain, not letters. Underneath the plank, carved low and deep where a knife would not be noticed, was a line of 12 small circles, concentric, neat as a clock face. I stepped under. I felt something lightly tap the crown of my hat, like a cobweb or a child's unaimed hand. The smell of iron grew honest. My lamp found prints in the red, new ones, clear as a photograph, boots walking out of the gate. Not mine. Not boot prints I knew. Beside them, a second set. Bare feet, narrow and long, heels low, pads high, the step of someone who's learned how to not wake a house. The bare tracks were deeper than the boots in the places where the red ran darkest. I followed both because the red taught me that night that sometimes the only way to survive a rule is to learn it while you're inside it. The bare feet and the boots kept company the way 2 truths do when neither wants to admit the other. They walked side by side for a few yards, then drifted apart as the trail tightened and the laurel leaned in and combed my sleeves with its dry fingers. The red soil under my lamp looked like it had been licked clean of leaves. Wind pressed the trees into low bows. Somewhere behind the gate, a night bird made a single, small sound and then decided against repeating itself. I told my breath to act like I wasn't asking anything impossible of it. It did its best. The first place the path asked me a question was a fork that didn't look like one. The ribbon of red split into two equal narrow lanes, both edged by those small ringed cups, 12 to a wreath, the center dent darker as if weather remembered something there. On the left, the boot prints continued, a steady march. On the right, the bare feet chose the quieter way, adrift like smoke. I stood with my lamp low and watched my own shadow try to decide. My legs wanted the boots because boots mean human and human means rules I understand. My teeth wanted the bare feet because something in the gums pulled forward like I was tasting summer on a cold night. Here, the voice said again, from no direction and every tree, the word carried my name in its mouth without saying it. I set my jaw around my own vowels and picked the boot prints. The left-hand track walked me into a small, open place like a workyard where the trees had agreed to step back long enough for a thing to be fixed. The red ran wider here, stamped flat. Long grooves cut across it, old ruts that could have been wagon lines if this place believed in roads. A post stood in the center with a metal ring set into it, big as a wrist, iron worn smooth by years of rope. The boot prints circled the post once, slow, then walked on. I did not circle. I looked at the ring and the ring looked back and we decided not to learn each other. On the far edge, the path squeezed down again, and the red deepened until my lamp painted my boots the color of a story I didn't want. I passed the first mark that meant the path wasn't only a shortcut. It was a rule someone made and forgot to write down. A tree had been cut at shoulder height long ago and left as a squared-off stump. Into its face someone had carved 12 circles in a perfect wheel, each the size of a coin, each deeper than the next until the center was a narrow well that had held rain until it turned iron. I put my hand on the wood without thinking and the cold came through and stiffened my fingers on contact. Not like winter, more like metal, more like a hand that had learned to be a handle. I pulled back and jammed my fingers under my armpit and watched steam where there should not have been any. Don't, I told myself. The word wasn't about the stump. It was about the second step I always take toward things that have already told me what they are. Ahead, the red cut downslope toward water. I knew it before my ears did. Cold gathers where water asks the ground to change shape. A breath of wet came up and wrote on my face. The creek here wasn't the one I'd crossed. This one slid slow as if trying not to show its depth. The red path ran right along the bank like a lip. The boot prints walked the edge with confidence. The bare feet had rejoined, there, in the wet, deep enough to hold a little shine where my lamp looked. The bare toes turned once toward the water, then away, like a person checking a temperature they already know. On the far bank, the laurel formed an arch that would make a picture if I were a kind of person who still took pictures in places that speak. The water made a sound the color of iron filings, and I hated that I knew what that sounded like. The footsteps behind me came again, not closer, not farther, just present, the way a tailwind is present. You think you're fast until you turn around. I moved on, and the red began to climb, slow, mean, asking my thighs to write checks all the old runs had taught me to cash. The blazes on the trees grew brighter, not because the paint was new, but because my lamp wanted to believe in them harder. At the top of that push, I found the first thing that made the hair on the back of my neck lie down from fear into a kind of obedience. It was a shrine if that word didn't make things too fancy. A low flat rock had been cleared of leaves and set with 3 small objects. A button, a key, a ring. Not arranged like a picture. Laid down the way hands lay things down when the hands are tired. The button was bone or plastic that had learned bone's color. The key was brass gone dull, old house, not car, teeth worn but not broken. The ring was iron or something that had decided to be iron. It had no stone. It had been bent and bent back again. Beside them, stamped into the red with a sure hand, the 12-circle wreath, the center dent pressed so crisp it looked wet. I crouched because my knees wanted to understand. I did not touch. Touching is a vote. The air above the rock tasted like a battery. I stood and the path walked me on because that's what paths do. The footsteps behind me stepped when I stepped and stopped when I stopped and never learned shame. At a place where the ridge threw its shoulder into the sky, the red ran straight for 50 yards like a ruler had finally been trusted. My lamp caught a sign at the far end. A plank nailed high, carved deep, letters blacked with something that had been smoke. Keep Tio the red after midnight, it said, and below, smaller, harder to see until my eyes decided they were allowed the truth. Do not answer what knows your name. Someone had dragged a knife across that second line until the words looked like weeds. But the grooves held the last of the black, and the message held me. I looked at my watch. I had not checked it since the creek. The face showed 12:08. I had started down at 9. The red had done what distance does when it's allowed to play in certain counties of the world. It folded, it borrowed, it paid back a penny short. I could feel the time on my teeth. I closed my mouth and pressed my tongue to the back of them to anchor myself. The path angled into a stand of pines that had agreed to be an aisle. Needles muffled everything until the steps behind me got louder for lack of competition. I stopped and stepped off into the duff and shone my lamp back the way I'd come. The beam ate trunks and gave me nothing. The steps stopped the way they always had. Respectful, patient, someone who has learned to stand when a person turns around. Enough, I said to the dark, and the word came out in the voice I use when I talk to dogs who want to chase a car. The steps took no step. I took one forward and they matched, just once, like a nod you can hear. The pines opened to a small hill and a fence that couldn't keep anything. 3 posts, 2 rails, 1 missing. Beyond it, a road. Not the gravel I'd hoped for. Not maintenance. A strip of old macadam gone to weeds. The yellow line a ghost. The red path ran to the fence and then right along it, parallel to the dead road, like a rule argued with a law. The boot prints stayed faithful. The bare feet walked in the strip of grass between the rails, careful not to touch wood. I did what the boots did because boots have carried more of me home than anything soft. The voice called again, closer this time, a porch voice that had learned how far sound carries on cold air. It did not use my name now. It said a thing I say to myself when I am too tired and almost saved. Just a little more. The urge to answer came up like a cough. I swallowed it sharp and felt the burn all the way into my chest. The red underfoot darkened until it was almost black and then lit itself from within with a low, flat glow. Not light, exactly. More like the dirt had learned how to be obvious. At the end of the fence line stood another gate twin to the first. 2 posts, crossbeam, broken chain, planks scraped of letters, 12 circles cut low where knives are not watched. Past it, the red widened into a flat, hard apron that could have been a loading dock if this place used trucks. In the middle of the apron, something that had no right to be there waited like a thought you forgot to invite. It was a payphone, the old kind. Metal box, plastic shell, receiver hanging by a twisted cord. No booth, just the phone, freestanding, humming with a power it could not possibly have. I knew it was humming because I could feel it in the thin bones just in front of my ears. A mosquito sound that wasn't a bug. The coin slot wore rust like a scab. On the metal faceplate someone had scratched a circle 12 times around the numbers, and the 0, the clean round, had a little dent pressed in the enamel center like a fingertip had made it years ago and nobody had polished it out. The receiver hung a few inches from its cradle and turned slowly once and back, the cord pretending to be a chain in a tired wind. When it turned, the mouthpiece faced me. A voice came out of it that I knew and will always know. because there is only one person who can say your name and make it weigh what it weighs in your own head. It was mine. Pick up, I said, and hated the way I asked myself for a thing. Pick up, I said from the receiver, a half-second late, with a breath I recognized. I'd learned that breath the first winter I tried to run in cold air and discovered lungs have edges. I shook my head and felt stupidly grateful to be shaking a real head, with real ears catching real wind. The footsteps behind me took a single step onto the apron and stopped right at the line where the red went darkest. I didn't touch the phone. I spoke to the air near it the way you talk to bees. What happens if I do? What happens if I do? The receiver said, softer, and the words had a wobble like a person speaking with a lip split inside. Then, my voice again, from far down a long pipe. Don't answer what knows your name. Something at my back clicked. Metal on wood. I turned my lamp. The gate's chain had lifted from where it slouched and hung now through the hooked staple like a clasp had reached up from the red path and finished its work. I hadn't heard it move. The chain looked like it had always been like that. The steps behind me shifted their weight the way a person does when they decide to go or to stay. The phone turned one slow half-circle more. In the center of the dial, in the zero, the dent looked dark and new. My hand lifted because hands go where the rule is softest. I stopped it by grabbing my own wrist like a stranger. The receiver breathed once more and said a word I have never said in my own voice to myself. Not out loud. Please. The old owl worked the question again, far off and final. The red under my boots brightened and then dimmed, as if it had decided to survive this moment with or without me. I let my wrist go. I let my hand fall. I stepped backward one step, then another until my heel touched the gate's low rail, and I stepped over, and the chain did nothing to stop me. I did not run. Running teaches a path where your knees live. I walked with my mouth closed and my breath going out my nose and down my chest like a good animal. When the voice called my name behind me, I felt every letter touch my spine and I did not answer, because at 12:23 after midnight on a red path in a county that folds distance for work, I finally believed a sign someone scraped off on purpose. I reached the first gate. The 12 little circles carved low looked like coins in my lamp, and I wanted badly to press my thumb into the center. I didn't. I stepped under. Something tapped my hat again. A low wind like a breath moved past my ear and decided to leave. The footsteps behind me stayed on their side for a count of 4 and then began again, unembarrassed. The path took me back by the creek and the work yard and the stump with its cold, coin-deep wheel. At the fork, the bare feet kept right, the boots kept left. I kept left, and the weight that had been traveling with me for the last hour leaned the other way like a polite stranger making room on a narrow stair. I crossed the 3-step bridge, and the sign at the far post didn't swing anymore. It hung still as if reading. The chain handrail had gathered a thin frost that my glove printed and erased with each careful touch. When the white oak with the red blaze appeared like a friend too late to help, I stopped and let my lamp go low. The wind in the higher trees sounded more like wind and less like breath. The scream of the rabbit, or whatever carried that music in this valley, did not happen again. The footsteps behind me took one last step and then settled their weight in the leaves, like a person adjusting a tired back against a real tree. I turned my lamp up and let it burn on the white blaze until my eyes hurt with the ordinary brightness of paint. I walked to camp by phone light like I had promised myself 4 hours and 1 life ago. The shelter held the kind of warmth people make without agreeing to. A soup of sleeping bags and boiled noodles and quiet snoring. Someone had hung a lantern under the overhang and left it on low for latecomers like me. When I stepped into that cone of human light, my body remembered how to be cells and not idea. 7 faces looked up from lying down, checked for bear or ranger or trouble, found only me, and returned to the truce of tired. I picked the far corner, unrolled my pad, and laid down with my boots under my knees because I did not want anyone to see me sleep with them on. A young guy 2 spots over, eyes bright in a way that means he hasn't had to choose many hard things yet, whispered, "You come down the red?" I almost said no. He grinned without waiting. Shortcuts gnarly after rain. He yawned and rolled. The lantern hummed the way old lanterns do when the mantle is thinking about giving up. Out in the dark beyond the posts, something stepped through leaves, and it sounded like deer because I wanted it to. I fell asleep the way people do when they make a small promise to the air and the air decides to believe them. I dreamed a phone ringing in a house with no walls. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, and the cord was as long as the red path. I woke before it reached me, with my hand on my own wrist. Morning made the trees into trees again. Bacon happened somewhere, which means someone had carried too much meat too far in a pack for love of strangers. Coffee became a line. I sat with my tin cup and listened to hikers say the gentle lies they say. Great sleep, easy climb, no blisters, weights nothing. A man in a blaze orange cap asked if anyone had seen the old pay phone down the spur. I froze without freezing. Thought I heard it, he said, biting into a bar that had all the joy of sawdust. Weird, right? Out here? Must be a prank. People laughed. Polite because morning isn't for scaring. I left before I could be asked to agree. The main trail wore sunlight in strips and made its old cathedral out of trunks and needled rafters. I walked until the red in the dirt turned back to brown and then to the pale dust of places where feet outnumber rain. Somewhere before noon, a ranger in a green jacket that had seen a lot of shoulders lifted a hand and asked if I'd mind answering a couple of questions about a closure farther south. I said sure because I wanted the human exchange to sand me down to size. He asked his questions. I answered. Then his eyes hooked something on my face that I couldn't feel and he said, just as a person, "You look like you saw something last night." Shortcut, I said. Got weird. He nodded like Weird had walked into his office before and sat down without being asked. Red spur, he said, and when I didn't answer, he added, the old one, not on the new map. Folks repaint it sometimes. We scrape it sometimes. Depends on who wins that season. What's wrong with it? He took off his cap and scratched the line a hat makes. Nothing you can write up, he said. Just that people walk it after midnight when they shouldn't, and some of them hear things they know too well. We tell them keep to the white or blue if they must. Red's for blood, you know how that goes. He watched my mouth, not knowing whether to smile. You hear anybody calling you by name? I could have said no. He would have let me. Yep, I said, because I'm tired of living with the word that lies least and still steals your sleep. I didn't answer. Good, he said, like a father praising a kid for looking both ways. If you hear it again, keep walking. Don't match rhythms. Don't count. Don't press the center of anything that looks like a coin. He made a small face. Sounds dumb saying it out loud. Works though. The phone, I said before the good sense part of me could bribe the speaking part. Down there. It was, I couldn't find the word that wasn't humming. He raised his eyebrows fast and dropped them slow, like he'd bumped into a friend he didn't want to introduce. It rings for some, he said. Some it doesn't. If it does, you keep your hands soft and your ears hard. He replaced his cap. It's a bad road to learn you can talk to yourself in. He thanked me for the answers and I thanked him for not asking questions he already knew. We parted on a stretch where the ridge shows you a county and a half and the sky sits on it like a lid. I walked until the day made me easy again. Back home, the city performed its good dumb tricks. Horns. People with somewhere to be and none of them here. I showered until the red dust went out of the tile grout. I put my phone on the counter face down and let it be an appliance again. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the heater knock in the pipes like a polite ghost. When the room had decided to belong to me again, I checked the call log even though I don't know what I thought I'd find. No missed calls. No strange numbers. Just the everyday list of proof that I exist in other people's pockets. At 2 in the morning, the building settled in its old bones the way buildings do between weather. The radiator sighed. Somewhere outside, a person laughed a little too long at nothing. From the kitchen, the landline I keep because my mother insists it means I'm reachable rang once. A single, careful chime. Not the pattern my service uses. Not any pattern I've taught the night. Just one ring, and then the silence that follows when a thing decides whether to try again. I stood in the doorway and looked at the phone like it was an animal that had wandered in. The red path was far away and also under the floorboards and also in the thin blood in my lips when I pressed them together to keep my name inside. The phone did not ring again. I walked to it and put my hand on the receiver and rested it there the way you rest your palm on the hood of a car to feel if the engine is still warm. It was room temperature. It was innocent. The silence behind it was not. I unplugged the cord from the wall, not because I think that sort of thing stops what needs no wire, but because sometimes you have to do a human thing the human way for your body to follow your rule. I wrote 3 rules on an index card and taped them above the kitchen light. Don't answer what knows your name. Keep to the white after dark. If you come to a circle, don't press the center. They look ridiculous in daylight. At night, they look like a spell written by someone who loves me. Weeks later, a friend sent a group text about a weird red clay stain on a side trail after a storm, and everyone took turns making jokes about Georgia and ghost roads and Instagram filters. I put my phone face down and visited the window. The city lay in slabs. Far out, a siren climbed and fell and became only air. I told the glass what I tell it now when the night comes polite and close. I'm here. I'm not answering. I'm walking on. Sometimes, when the hour is thin and the quiet is full of teeth, a voice arrives from the nowhere tastes of iron and kindly ruin. It says just a little more in my exact mouth. I think about the phone in the dark and the ring of circles cut low on posts and the way the red learns to light itself from within when it wants a vote. I let the voice finish its sentence. I do not give it a second. I turn from the window and step back into my rooms like they are a trail I marked in paint I mixed with my own hands. And if, one night, that old path scratches at my door and tries my name on like a coat it stole and keeps wearing, I will do the smallest, bravest thing I learned out there under the scraped sign and the broken chain. I will keep my rules. I will keep my feet. I will keep my silence. Because some calls are just the mountain checking if you still remember its number. And some answers cost more than the miles you paid to earn them. I found the well by following a noise that wasn't supposed to exist in quiet woods. It was the sound of water remembering a word. Not running, not dripping. A soft syllable repeated under the trees, like a child practicing how to speak in an empty room. I had left the main trail on purpose. I'd been walking too long with people and their bright voices and their clean boots, and I wanted a place that didn't know me. The spur was barely a path, just a wish through laurel and deadfall. And then the timber opened into a small bowl of ferns and stone where a circle of dry gray blocks sat as neat as a mouth that had forgotten its teeth. The well was old without trying. Stones mortared with something that had outlived names. A round lip worn smooth by hands and rope. No roof, no windlass, no crank. Just the mouth and a single shadow going down, holding its breath. Moss made a thin green collar around the rim where shade stayed forever. Ivy had reached up the outside like fingers testing a door and stopped in a polite ring, as if someone had said, "No closer." When I leaned over, cool air rose with the little word sound, and the word was almost my name. "Hello," I said to prove it wasn't. "Hello," the well said, one heartbeat late, in a small voice that didn't belong to me or any grown person. A child's voice, clear, not cute, the way kids sound when they're trying out their adult shape. I froze with my hands on the stone and felt the cold climb my wrists like water. "Is anyone down there?" I called, picturing a stuck hiker, or some poor kid in a dare gone bad, or a hunter's dog trapped on ledge. "Down there," the well said. My sentence clipped and lighter, like the words had been peeled and set back smaller. I pulled my headlamp from my pocket because fear and curiosity weigh the same if you don't decide quickly. I clicked it to high and pointed the beam straight into the throat. The light fell and found only the round inside wall, the quiet drift of fern seeds falling like slow snow, and then a circle of water far below, flat as a coin. No shapes on the stones, no ropes, no ladder rungs, just that bright circle and the faint smell of iron, the way old water keeps a memory. "Can you hear me?" I tried, louder, one hand on the stone, the other cupped to my mouth. "Can you hear me?" The little voice answered, and added a soft laugh that wasn't mine. "I don't scare easy in daylight, but I do respect." I took my hands off the rim and stepped back, counting leaves like a fool to keep my thoughts from running fast. Wind moved through the pines and made the air honest again. The well breathed up and said nothing of its own. I circled the stones, half expecting to see initials carved or a date someone loved enough to hammer into rock. Nothing, only a low square shelf built into the outer wall, like a place you'd set a bucket. For reasons I can't defend, I said my name first and last, plain as a roll call, to the opening. The well said my name back, first and last, and the last sounded like it wanted to be mine. It should have ended there. I should have laughed at myself and taken a picture of a circle of stone in a sweet little hollow and gone back to the main trail and eaten my dumb lunch with the other tired people and told no one. Instead, I did the thing my grandfather used to do when he stood at a fence and felt like there was a rule on the other side. I tested. I picked up a pebble. I dropped it down and counted until the small clink worked up from the dark. The sound came late, like a surprise that had been warned. I tried a bigger stone. The echo came back right. Physics still worked. The child voice didn't speak until I spoke first. "Why do you sound like that?" I asked, standing taller, because questions feel better when you stand like a person in a kitchen talking to someone with a cup in their hand. "Like that," it said, clean and thin. "What are you? What are you?" I thought of the trick some caves play where your words bounce back small through parallel mouths. I thought of the way my own voice sounds on bad voicemail, new and wrong. I leaned in again and saw my reflection wobble on the coin of water far below. It was not a child's face. It was mine, rippled, with my mouth half open like I was about to say something important and hadn't earned it. "Okay," I told the stone circle. "I see you," which was ridiculous. "See you," the well said softly, and this time I thought I heard relief. I was about to leave when I noticed the bucket shelf again. It had a groove worn into it. Not big. The kind rope leaves when rope works the same path for years. I ran my finger along it and felt a roughness like old salt. Without thinking, I took my empty Nalgene, clipped to my pack, and set it on that square. It fit in a way that made my arms warm. I did not lower it. There was no rope, and I am not a fool. I just looked at the plastic in that old spot and felt watched by something that didn't hate me. I walked out of the bowl with my head full and my mouth empty. The spur's laurel seemed brighter, the main trail louder. Hikers were crossing stories like wires. I told no one, not that day, but that night, in my little rented room back in town where the window faces bricks and the radiator ticks like a sleepy metronome, I heard a sound that didn't belong to any apartment. A small rope sliding wood, once slow, like a bucket being lowered by careful hands. I sat up. I told myself pipes are pipes and old buildings drink. I told myself to sleep. The city sighed. Somewhere far away, a siren climbed and fell, and under it, close and simple, A child's laugh rode up from the floor and rode away again. The next morning I went back because I couldn't not. The woods were wet and smelled clean, the kind of clean that makes you think about soap and second chances. The ferns were bright as a promise. The well sat where it had sat for however long wells sit, patient as a closed book. On the square shelf of stone, something waited that had not been there yesterday. My pocket knife, the cheap red one I'd lost in June on a ridge 40 miles from here. The one with the blunt blade and the dent in the handle where I tried once to pry a bottle cap and learned not to. It lay neatly on the shelf, bead of water on the plastic, edge turned toward me like a polite handshake. I didn't touch it right away. I looked into the well and saw the bright coin of water and my own small shape and nothing like a hand. How? I asked, not sure who deserved the answer. How? The well said, no laugh this time. Just the word set back to me, like a mother setting a toy on the floor and seeing if I'd crawl. I picked up the knife. It was mine. Tasted like metal and rain on my tongue when I tested the old habit. I opened the small blade and closed it with that exact little click I remembered. I set it back on the stone and stepped away. The child's voice rose up through stone and air, barely louder than breath, and said my first name like a question. I took the knife and put it in my pocket and left, because fear is a heavy door and I know when to lean my weight on it. That night, the rope sound came again in my apartment, and the small laugh didn't. Instead, from the dark place between cupboards and floor, a quiet voice I recognized, mine, but younger, said one word that tasted like old iron and clean water. Please. I didn't answer. I slept sitting up in a chair because I remembered my grandfather once saying that sometimes you have to change where your heart is when you're being counted by the wrong things. I told myself I wasn't going back. Then I found my house keys on the well stone shelf. And a rule is only a rule until the world learns your name. It was the third visit. On the second, I had taken nothing and left nothing. I had stood with my hands behind my back like a cheap museum guard and said neutral things into the mouth, weather words, directional words, and the well had repeated them softly, always one beat late, always in that child's tone that made my ribs feel hollow. On the third, the morning felt like a shirt pulled on backward. Birds made new mistakes. The small bowl where the well lived held a chill the trail did not. I approached, thinking I would only look and then choose to be wise. But the glint on the shelf snagged me like a hook. My keys were laid in a clean little fan, brass and dull nickel on the stone. The rubber tag the landlord had given me dangled like a tongue. I had lost those keys in July in the grocery parking lot, when a thunderstorm slapped the town, and I ran dumb to the sliding doors with 2 bags and a brain that thought it could hold more than hands. I'd paid for recuts. I taped the spare key to the back of my phone in a way no thief would respect. Here they were, every notch right. The little bottle opener shaped like a fish I'd had since college winked like it was in on a joke. I didn't reach. That was the hardest thing I did that day. I squatted and looked. The stone was dry around the keys, damp under them, like they'd been set down with wet fingers. I looked into the throat, and the bright coin of water waited without answer. My voice felt too big for my mouth. Why? I asked and heard the smallness of it. Why? The well said, the child voice climbing the vowel and getting down safe. Then gentler, back, back, I said, because I have never been brave when the simplest rule in the room is symmetry. I took the keys. The metal felt like pockets and missteps and the day in July when I let weather make me clumsy. I put them in my chest pocket, close, the way you put magic you don't trust. I stood up and stepped away and tried to breathe without taking anything that wasn't mine. The ivy around the base of the well looked greener than any ivy has a right to be. A small beetle crawled across the mortar as if letters had been hidden there and only bugs were allowed to read them. I thought then of an exchange, rude and human and maybe necessary. I went down to the creek, which hid under hemlock roots, and filled my Nalgene. Back at the well, I very carefully poured a cup of that water over the outer stones, not into the mouth. It darkened the stone like a kind hand. "Thank you," I said, which I learned to say because I didn't want the mountain to think I was raised wrong. "Thank you," the well said, soft as a prayer 2 rooms over. That afternoon back in town, my apartment felt too full of corners. I put the returned keys in a drawer and closed it like a mouth. The radiator hissed a small laugh I couldn't mistake. I laid on the rug and watched the light drag across the ceiling and tried not to hear rope on wood. But it was there, a quiet slide, and then another, like someone practicing how to lower a bucket without a splash. I stood up and said a rule, out loud. "I won't go back tomorrow," I told the air and the plaster. "You can ask. I can say no." Saying it made the room like me again. I slept. The next day I went anyway, like a man goes to a door he said he wouldn't knock. I brought a rope. Not to lower anything, that would be insane, but because the coil over my shoulder felt like a promise I could keep. I will not fall in. The woods were warmer, the ferns a tired green. I ran my hand along the mortar stone by stone, palm flat, trusting touch more than eyes. The well made no new words until I leaned over and gave it mine, one at a time. "Listen," I said. I think you're giving things back to me." "Back?" the child said, and the way that word sat in its mouth told me it knew the weight. "Why?" I asked again, hating the smallness of the question and loving that it stayed small. "Because," the well said, and then, like a kid who has learned a trick and wants to show it, 2 words together, pressed carefully. "You lost." "I lost," I said, and I wanted to cry for every shoe and thought and time and person. "I lost a lot." "Lot," it said, delighted to discover you could weigh something with 3 letters. The rope over my shoulder felt silly and good. I took it off and set it on the shelf beside where my keys had waited. I tied a little bow in one end like a gift a child would understand. "I can't lower a bucket," I told the stones. "I can't drop anything down there, but I can leave something with you and mean it. You don't have to give it back." Silence, and then, absurd but true, the sound of a bucket handle knocking lightly against wood. "Leave," it said soft. "Mean it. Mean it," I promised. I went back every second day, then every day, then twice in one, telling myself I was studying something beautiful and old and that curiosity was not a drug if you wrote things down. I spoke simple sentences and the well returned them shaved small. Sometimes it laughed, a pure soft thing that made my bones less sharp. Once, just to see, I whispered the name of someone I'd loved badly 8 years ago. A name I don't let myself say because it feels like breaking into a closed house. The well did not repeat the name. It said no, the first word that did not match mine. I sat down because my knees failed. "No," I agreed after a long time. On the 7th visit, there was a note on the shelf. Folded, pale, lined paper, the cheap kind you pull from a spiral before you quit a class. On the outside, my name. Inside, my handwriting, not similar, not weirdly close, mine. A slant I learned in 8th grade when a teacher told me to stop pressing so hard or I'd break the desk. The note was 5 words. "Don't answer me on Sunday." I checked my phone. It was Thursday. When you tell people this part, they ask why I ever went back. As if a well that returns what you've lost can be ignored like a pop song. As if a voice that doesn't lie doesn't deserve your walking. I went back Monday morning with my shoulders square and the note in my pocket and my mouth ready to be exactly as open as I allowed it. The bowl of trees felt like a room I rent for a season. The ferns had leaned a little, as if listening all weekend. The well sat honest as a clock. On the shelf, nothing waited. The stone held damp the way cold stone does. I leaned in and said my name, plain, willing to forgive myself if my voice did a small ache. Nothing answered. I tried again. "Hello," I said. Silence, save the faintest sound of water touching its edges and approving. My throat closed. I laughed to keep it open. I listened. I told the stones. I didn't answer on Sunday. I did it exactly. Exactly, the well said. And I almost cried at how joy could be a quiet word delivered back to you in a child's voice. I have a question, I said, and then more honest. I have a lot of questions. But here's the one you can say. What do you want? What do you want? It returned. And then, like the day it had learned 2 words and moved them around 3, pressed together slowly like blocks. You want back. I want back, I admitted, and the list rolled in me like a kind flood. I want the knife and the keys and the names and the way a morning smells when you haven't broken it yet. I want the day before the day I forgot to say I'm sorry. I want my grandfather's hand on a fence showing me what a knot means. I want to drink water that remembers only rain. There was a long, beautiful pause. In it, I heard the wind consider and decide and move. The well breathed cool against my face. Bring, it said finally. Then, patient, as if reminding me how to stand. Leave. I had been waiting for this rule and hating that it would come. Exchange. A thing that keeps the universe snug, too snug, like a belt. What do you want me to leave? I whispered, already knowing the shape of loss. The well didn't speak in words. It breathed up a smell like paper. Cheap notebook paper. Pencil and skin oil and the soft mineral of erasers. I pulled the note from my pocket, the future note, the one in my own hand, and set it on the stone shelf as if it had been destined to sit there all week. This? I asked. This? The well said, like a hand on a small shoulder assuring it the coat will fit. I left the note. The stone drank the small wet from my fingers. I took one step back, holding my breath like I was at the lip of a pool that had watched a lot of children learn. From below, a rope sound rose, not the slide now, the pull, the weight-carrying weight. It was a sound that ages people. It was a sound that teaches patience your last lesson. Then, from the deep coin, the voice climbed, thinner, stretched. Back, it said. Back, back. Not command. Report. I leaned over in time to see something break the surface and turn once in the light like a coin showing both sides, then settle and knock softly against stone. I knew that sound like I knew my own breath. I lowered my headlamp, useless in day, and saw it. A wallet, black, scuffed, with a broken zipper, the same one I had lost 3 years ago on a bus to a job I did not keep. I reached with both hands, thinking, idiot, you can't reach that far. And then I could, because something in the distance between where my arms ended and the water waited had been folded kindly by rules I didn't own. It was cold. It was my wallet. Inside, old ID, my grandfather's picture, the smudged corner of a trail map where I had circled a campsite with a pen that had leaked. $40 I had sworn I was going to spend on groceries and spent on nothing because I had lost the chance. I set it on the shelf and my knees gave up sitting. Thank you, I said. The way you say it to a door when someone holds it and doesn't look you in the face so you can cry if you want. Thank you, the well said back. And this time the laugh and the word braided like rope and sound. I should stop here, but the story doesn't. Wells are not faucets. Rules are not suggestions. When I stood, the well spoke again, quick, eager, as if it had learned to ask. Bring, it said. Leave. Sunday. I didn't flinch. Every Sunday? I asked. I can't promise every Sunday. Sunday, it said, even softer. Don't answer. I caught it then, the twine looped through the whole thing. It wasn't just asking me to come. It was telling me to keep the one day that had saved me from myself. Sunday was for not answering. Sunday was a lid, a rest, a gate left open for air. I nodded at rock like rock had eyes. "I will not answer on Sundays," I promised. "I will bring what I can bear to lose and leave it, and I won't ask for more than I can carry back." The next weeks taught me a new grammar. I brought small things that meant heavy. A matchbook from a bar where I learned something I didn't want to know. A receipt from a morning I should have stayed home. A name written once in a kind of ink that stains. I left them on the stone, and the well breathed and gave me back different weight. A childhood marble, green with a comet tail, that I lost when I was 9. A yellow hair ribbon I tied on a sapling at 12 to mark the way to a secret and forgotten. A silver button from a jacket my mother mended when I was 14, and certain people complicated the world. None of it made sense. All of it did. The world is not neat. It is exact. Once, stupid, greedy, loving this too much, I whispered at the rim, "Can you give me back a person?" The child voice said my name and no. And the no was kind and heavy and final, like a hand on your shoulder at the end of a long day. I cried, long overdue, and the well let me finish and did not try to be part of it, which is the best thing anyone can do when you're finishing. Other rules learned me. I never lowered a rope. I never poured water in. I never dropped anything down. The well was not a hole for trash, and I was not a man who would make it one. I never spoke on Sunday, not to it, not to anything that could turn my voice into a mirror. If, on a Sunday, the faucet in my kitchen gurgled my name, I hummed a tune my grandfather had hummed fixing a fence and let the water be water. The last time I went that season, winter had written its initials on the laurel. The ferns looked tired and proud. I set on the shelf a small torn corner of the note. The one from the first week, now worn and finger-soft. That read, "Don't answer." I kept the rest. "I'm going away for a while," I told the stones. "I'll come back when the ground says yes again." Ground says yes. The well agreed, new sentence, old truth. From below, the rope sound came, and up came something I did not know I'd lost and needed. A short pencil chewed, duct-taped where it had split. My grandfather had kept one behind his ear in every season. I took it and put it behind mine and laughed like breathing and promised myself I would keep it there until it fell without breaking.